clipboard already had my name on it. My shift hadn't started yet, but the report was already written. At the time, I thought it was a mistake. Later, I realized it was already written. I need to back up. My name is Daniel Voss. I inspect mines for the Nevada Division of Minerals, Bureau of Mine Safety and Reclamation. Not active mines, dead ones. Sealed operations, historical sites, places where someone filed a complaint about teenagers getting in, or a landowner noticed subsidence on a parcel that hasn't been worked since 1978. I show up. I check structural integrity, gas levels, water intrusion, signage compliance. I write a report. I file the report. Someone reads it, or more often, no one reads it. The mine continues sitting in whatever condition I found it in, because the funding to remediate anything dried up in 2019 and never came back. I am not a dramatic person. I don't embellish. I've been doing this for 11 years. Maybe 300 sites across Nevada, Utah, parts of Eastern California. I have never, in any report, written anything that couldn't be verified by a second inspector. I need you to understand that about me before I tell you about Robinson. The Robinson copper mine sits near Ely, Nevada, in White Pine County. If you've never been to Ely, that's not unusual. Small town along Highway 93, about 6,400 feet elevation in a high desert valley. The mine is a significant historical operation. Open pit copper extraction going back to 1907, but underneath it, an extensive network of underground workings. The open pits are still visible from satellite. They're enormous. But the underground sections were sealed decades ago. Shafts and adits closed with concrete plugs or steel grates, some just backfilled with waste rock. The whole site exists in administrative limbo. Not technically active, not fully remediated. Occasional inspections. I received the assignment on Tuesday, March 11th, from my supervisor, Carol Mattis. A rancher had reported seeing lights near one of the sealed adit entrances on the eastern side of the operation, the section locally known as the Veteran Tunnel Complex. The BLM wanted someone to check whether the seals were intact and whether there was evidence of unauthorized entry. Carol assigned it to me because I was already in the area. She asked me to conduct the inspection Wednesday night. Not Wednesday morning. Wednesday night. The BLM contact had noted the lights were observed after dark, around 10 or 11 p.m., and they wanted the inspection during similar hours. Unusual, but not unheard of. I've done night inspections before. They're quieter. Surface noise drops away. You hear more. I arrived in Ely Wednesday afternoon, checked into the Jailhouse Motel on 5th Street, ate dinner at a Mexican restaurant whose name I don't recall, reviewed the site file, which was thin. Most recent inspection had been 14 months earlier by a contractor, Hargrove Associates. All seals intact, no intrusion, nominal gas readings, recommendation to continue monitoring annually. Routine. I expected my visit to produce a similar result. I drove out at approximately 9:15 p.m., 4 miles of unpaved road south from the highway. Gate unlocked. BLM had left it open for me. I parked near the concrete pad marking the old equipment staging area and unloaded my gear. Standard kit. Hard hat with headlamp, 4-gas monitor calibrated for oxygen, methane, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen sulfide, handheld anemometer, digital camera, clipboard with inspection forms, hand tools, backup flashlight, personal locator beacon, two-way radio. I also had a partial schematic of the veteran tunnel complex from the Division archives showing 3 main levels connected by 2 internal shafts. Primary adit opening at the 2nd level. The entrance is set into a low hillside, old timber and concrete framing. The seal was a steel door, less common than a concrete plug, but used at sites where periodic access is anticipated. The door was closed. Lock functional. I had been given a key. I opened it. Beyond the door was a short concrete-lined passage, about 20 feet, opening into the old shift supervisor station, a small chamber, 10 by 12, concrete floor, remnants of a wooden desk, a metal filing cabinet, a wallboard with hooks. The kind of setup where miners would check in, receive assignments, hang their tags. A window-like opening in the wall looked out into the main drift so the supervisor could watch crews entering and exiting. On the desk, there was a clipboard. I want to be precise about this. There is nothing inherently strange about finding a clipboard on a desk in a mine's shift station. These places were workplaces. People left things behind. I found coffee mugs, calendars, personal photographs, a pair of reading glasses, all preserved by the dry, stable air underground. A clipboard on a desk was unremarkable. What was on the clipboard was not. It held a single sheet of paper, standard letter size, white, printed, not handwritten, in a plain serif font. At the top, in a format I recognized immediately because I use it myself, was the header of a Nevada Division of Minerals mine inspection shift log. Our header, the state seal, the Bureau's name, form number NRS 7B. The site name was listed as Robinson Mine, Veteran Tunnel Complex, Eastern Workings. The date was listed as March 12th. The inspector name was listed as Daniel Voss. I stared at it. The shift start time was listed as 9:47 p.m. I checked my watch. 9:43. The log said 9:47. I hadn't even started yet. I should tell you what I assumed, because it matters. I assumed this was an error. Administrative duplication. Maybe Carol had sent a preliminary form to the BLM office. Maybe Hargrove had a template with my name from a previous joint inspection, and it auto-populated. I've seen database errors produce stranger results. Once, I received an assignment for a mine that had been fully remediated in 2004 and no longer existed. System migration had duplicated records from 17 years earlier. Administrative systems are fallible. That was my assumption. But the shift times bothered me. The form showed a complete log, not just the header, timed entries in our format, each noting a specific action performed during an inspection. And the entries described a shift that had not yet occurred. My shift. Starting in 3 minutes. I set the clipboard down. I think I actually laughed. A short exhale through the nose. The kind that isn't amusement but is the sound your body makes when it encounters something it can't categorize. I picked it back up and read the first several entries. 9:47 p.m. Inspector arrives at shift station, conducts visual survey of entry condition. Notes steel door seal intact, no evidence of forced entry. Signage present and legible. 9:52 p.m. Inspector begins gas monitoring at station. O2 20.8%, CH4 0.00%, CO 0 ppm, H2S 0 ppm. All readings nominal. 9:58 p.m. Inspector proceeds east along main drift toward junction with shaft A access. Notes stable roof conditions, minimal water intrusion, timber supports in fair condition. 10:07 p.m. Inspector reaches shaft A access, conducts visual inspection of shaft collar. Notes grating intact, photographs taken. These were not unusual entries. They were exactly the kind of entries I would write. The language was correct. The abbreviations were correct. The level of detail was consistent with my reporting style. If you had shown me this log without the date, I would have believed I had written it. I set the clipboard down again, walked back to the entrance, stepped outside, stood by my truck. Clear night, maybe 38 degrees. Ely's lights faintly to the north, a soft amber smear on the horizon. I considered calling Carol, but it was nearly 10 and reception was poor. I considered leaving. I want to be honest. The reason I considered leaving was not fear. It was annoyance. I thought someone was staging a prank using official state forms, which is, incidentally, a misdemeanor. I went back inside, flipped the page. Beneath the first sheet was a second page. Same font, same paper, no header. A numbered list. At the top, in bold, Shift Protocol, Veteran Tunnel Complex, March 12th. 26 entries. I read the first 10. 1. You will check the ventilation panel at 11:14 p.m. 2. You will note the reading as adequate, but lower than expected. 3. You will photograph the panel and include the timestamp in your report. 4. At 11:21 p.m., you will hear what sounds like a distant mechanical hum from below the second level. You will pause and listen. 5. You will decide it is residual air movement through the lower workings. 6. You will proceed to the junction with shaft B. 7. You will hesitate before opening the shaft B access gate. 8. You will open it anyway. 9. At 11:38 p.m., you will notice that the air temperature has dropped by approximately 4 degrees. You will check your thermometer and confirm this. 10. You will not find this unusual. I stopped at 10. The shift log with my name was strange but explicable. This list was strange and not explicable. It was too specific. A prank would be vague. A prank would be funny. A prank would have a punchline. This didn't have a punchline. It had instructions. Written by someone who had already watched me do what I was going to do. But I am a rational person. Rational people don't leave a job site because of a piece of paper. Rational people note the anomaly, document it, and continue. I photographed both pages. I noted the discovery in my field notebook, and I began my inspection. The log said I would arrive at the station at 9:47. I had arrived at 9:44. 3 minutes early. This felt like a victory, which I recognize is an absurd reaction to have about a piece of paper. But it mattered. The log was wrong. Not by much, but wrong. And if it was wrong about the start time, it could be wrong about everything. I conducted my gas readings. Oxygen 20.8%, methane 0, carbon monoxide 0, hydrogen sulfide 0. Exactly what the log predicted. I moved on. Main drift heading east. Roughly 8 feet wide, 7 high, timbered at intervals, gradual downward grade. Floor dry. Timbers old but sound. I progressed slowly, tapping supports with my rock hammer, checking walls and roof at each set. Everything normal. I reached the shaft, A junction at 10:09 p.m. The log had said 10:07, 2 minutes late. Close, but not exact. An approximation, not a prophecy. Shaft collar intact. Steel grating bolted. No tampering. Photographed it. For the next 40 minutes, I conducted what I would describe as a thoroughly ordinary inspection. Second level accessible portions. Roof conditions. Old equipment. A rail cart, pipe sections, a collapsed wooden partition. Gas levels nominal throughout. The mine was stable, dry, and empty. It was at 10:54 p.m. that I became consciously aware I had not yet deviated from the sequence described in the log. I hadn't memorized it. I'd read only the first page of entries and 10 items on the protocol list. But the entries I'd read were general enough that any competent inspector would follow a similar sequence. Check gas levels, proceed down main drift, inspect shaft collar. These aren't predictions, they're standard operating procedure. That's what I told myself. But I wanted to check. I walked back to the shift station, picked up the clipboard, read the entries covering 10:03 to 10:50 p.m. 10:14 p.m. Inspector notes old rail cart at junction of D West lateral. Photographs taken. I had photographed the rail cart at approximately 10:14. 10:31 p.m. Inspector enters D West lateral to point of first collapse, approximately 220 feet from junction. Notes, collapse appears historic, not recent. I had done this. Walked the D West lateral until I reached old cave-in rubble and determined it was decades old. 10:42 p.m. Inspector returns to main drift. Pauses to adjust headlamp. Notes battery indicator shows 74%. I had adjusted my headlamp. The strap had been slipping left. I checked the battery now. 71%. Close, not exact. And then, this entry. 10:49 p.m. Inspector begins to feel mildly uneasy. Attributes feeling to isolation and darkness. Does not consider it significant. I put the clipboard down. I stood in that shift station in a mine in the Nevada desert at 11 at night, and I felt something I didn't have a word for. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling you get when you realize you've been driving on autopilot and don't remember the last several miles. Except I had been conscious. I remembered every step. I just hadn't realized those steps were already written down. It was already written. I picked the clipboard back up. Inspector begins to feel mildly uneasy. Attributes feeling to isolation and darkness. Does not consider it significant. The problem was this. I was uneasy. I was attributing it to isolation and darkness. And until I read that entry, I had not considered it significant. But now I was. Which meant the log was wrong. Except it didn't say I wouldn't eventually consider it significant. It said I wouldn't consider it significant at 10:49. And at 10:49, I hadn't. The realization came later, at 10:54, when I walked back to the station. The log didn't have an entry for 10:54. There was a gap between 10:49 and the next entry. 11:02. I checked my watch. 10:56. 6 minutes. The 11:02 entry read, Inspector proceeds south along Main Drift toward ventilation monitoring station at junction with lower access. I decided I would not proceed south. I decided this deliberately, clearly, with full awareness. I would go north, back toward the entrance. I would sit in my truck for 10 minutes. Then I would come back and continue in whatever order I chose. I picked up my gear and walked north. The entrance was exactly as I'd left it. Steel door open, propped with my rubber wedge. Night air coming in cool and clean, faintly of sagebrush. I stepped outside and walked to my truck. I want to tell you what I was thinking, because this is the part that matters. I was thinking about how to write this up, whether to call Carol in the morning or tonight, about the BLM contact and who had access to this site. Normal, professional thoughts. And then I was thinking about the ventilation station. Specifically, whether the readings at the lower junction would be consistent with the readings at the shift station. Oxygen had been 20.8% up top. In a mine with poor ventilation, oxygen decreases with depth. If the system was compromised, the lower levels might show depressed O2. This was a standard concern. This was my job. Not because the log said so, because it was my job. I checked my watch. 11:01. I walked back into the mine. I proceeded south along the main drift toward the ventilation monitoring station. I arrived at 11:03, 1 minute late. No one forced me. Nothing compelled me. I made a decision based on professional judgment. The fact that this decision aligned with the log does not mean the log controlled me. It means the log was written by someone who understood what a competent inspector would do. That's all. That is what I told myself. The ventilation station was a metal panel bolted to the drift wall where the main level meets the ramp down to the third level. Old analog gauge, non-functional. A newer digital sensor installed by the monitoring contractor, connected to a battery pack on the surface. Airflow, 23 feet per minute. Low. Not dangerous, but lower than expected. Minimal natural ventilation, typical for a sealed mine, but it meant gas levels could shift deeper in. I noted the reading. The time was 11:14 p.m. The protocol list had said, "You will check the ventilation panel at 11:14 p.m. I had stood outside for several minutes. I had walked back at a pace that felt unhurried. I had made what I believed were free choices about my timing. 11:14. Exactly. The list said, "You will note the reading is adequate but lower than expected." It was adequate, but lower than expected. The list said, "You will photograph the panel and include the timestamp in your report." I raised my camera. And then I stopped. I lowered it. I stood there in the drift, staring at the ventilation panel, and I made a conscious decision not to photograph it. This was the first time I had deliberately refused to do something the list described. Not a timing discrepancy, not a minor deviation, a refusal. The silence in the mine was absolute. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and in that silence, I heard it. A hum, distant, mechanical, rising from somewhere below the second level. Item 4. At 11:21 p.m., you will hear what sounds like a distant mechanical hum from below the second level. You will pause and listen. I checked my watch. 11:21. Item 5 said I would decide it was residual air movement through the lower workings. And the rational part of me, the part that has done this job for 11 years, recognized this was the most likely explanation. Air moving through collapsed workings and narrow passages can produce sounds. Moaning, whistling, humming. I've heard it before. It is not unusual. But I didn't decide that. I decided nothing. I just listened. The hum faded after about 15 seconds. The silence came back, thicker than before. Item 6. You will proceed to the junction with shaft B. Item 7. You will hesitate before opening the shaft B access gate. Item 8. You will open it anyway. I looked south, down the ramp toward the lower access and shaft B. The ramp descended at maybe 15 degrees. My headlamp reached about 40 feet into it before the darkness swallowed the beam. I did not proceed to the junction with shaft B, not yet. Instead, I did something the list did not describe. I went back to the shift station, picked up the clipboard, and I read the remaining entries, 11 through 26. I'm going to tell you what some of them said. 11. At 11:44 p.m., you will notice a mark on the wall of the shaft B corridor that is not on your schematic. You will examine it. 12. You will recognize it as a survey marker, but you will not recognize the notation system. 13. You will take a photograph. 14. At 11:52 p.m., you will reach the bottom of the access ramp. You will check your gas readings. O2 will read 19.6%. 15. You will note this but continue. 16. At 12:03 a.m. you will find a second clipboard. I stopped reading. Read it again. At 12:03 a.m. you will find a second clipboard. I looked at the clipboard in my hands. I looked down the drift toward shaft B. 17. The second clipboard will contain a shift log for an inspection you have not yet conducted. 18. The date on the second log will be March 19th. 19. You will not understand this. 20. You will read the log anyway. 21. At 12:11 a.m., you will hear the hum again, louder and closer. 22. You will realize it is not air movement. 23. You will not be able to identify what it is. 24. At 12:15 a.m., you will decide to leave. 25. You will return to the shift station to collect your equipment. I turned to entry 26. It was not printed in the same font as the others. It was handwritten. Neat, precise lettering. Ballpoint pen. Blue ink. 26. You will look at the desk. I looked at the desk. There was a second clipboard. It had not been there before. I am certain of this. I'd examined that desk. I'd picked up the first clipboard from its surface. The surface had been clear except for a layer of fine dust in the first clipboard. I am a person who notices things. It is literally my profession. The second clipboard wasn't dusty. It looked new, like it had just been placed there, like someone had been standing at that desk, waiting for me to find it. I picked it up. Single sheet, same header, same form. NRS 7B. Site name: Robinson Mine, Veteran Tunnel Complex, Eastern Workings. Inspector name: Daniel Voss. Date: March 19th. 1 week from now. The shift log was filled out. Complete. Every entry timed and detailed, exactly in my reporting style, describing an inspection I had not conducted of a mine I was currently standing in. The entries described me arriving at 10:12 p.m., conducting gas readings, proceeding through the main drift, reaching the shaft, A junction, the D West lateral, the ventilation station, and then continuing past the ventilation station, down the ramp, past the shaft B junction, deeper, into sections of the mine that were not on my schematic. The log described rooms I had never seen. It described formations. It described equipment that should not exist in a mine sealed for decades. And, at the bottom of the page, in the same handwriting as entry 26, a single line. It wasn't predicting me. It was remembering me. I put both clipboards down on the desk. I gathered my equipment. I walked north through the main drift, through the concrete-lined passage, past the steel door, and out into the Nevada night. I got in my truck. I drove back to Ely. I checked my watch when I reached the motel. 12:15 a.m. At 12:15 a.m., you will decide to leave. I did not sleep. In the morning, I called Carol. I described what I found. I used professional language. I recommended a follow-up inspection with a 2-person team and requested that the BLM secure the site and audit the access log to determine who had entered the veteran tunnel complex in the previous 30 days. Carol asked me if I had completed the inspection. I told her I had not. She asked why. I told her there were anomalous conditions that warranted a reassessment of the site's security status before further inspection could be safely conducted. This is language from our procedural manual. It means something was wrong and I left. Carol said she would schedule a follow-up. The follow-up was scheduled for March 19th. I did not ask to be assigned. I was assigned anyway. I need to tell you one more thing. When I got home, I uploaded the photographs from my camera. The photos of the first clipboard, the shift log, the protocol list, all there. Clear, legible, time-stamped. But there was one additional photograph on the camera that I did not take. It was time-stamped 12:08 a.m., March 12th. At 12:08, I had been walking north through the main drift toward the exit. I had not stopped. I had not raised my camera. I am certain of this. The photograph showed a section of mine I did not recognize. A corridor wider than any I had walked through, with smooth walls that looked machine-cut. At the far end of the corridor, there was a desk. On the desk, there was a clipboard. And standing next to the desk, at the edge of the headlamp's reach, barely visible, was a figure. I enlarged the image. The figure was wearing a hard hat. The vest appeared identical to mine. The stance, slightly forward, weight on the left foot, is how I stand when I'm reading something on a surface in front of me. I sent the photograph to a colleague without context and asked him what he saw. He said, "That's you." I told him it wasn't. He asked me who it was. I did not have an answer. The second clipboard, the one that appeared on the desk, contained a complete log for March 19th, and according to that log, at 10:47 p.m. on March 19th, I will find a third clipboard. The date on the third clipboard is April 2nd. And according to the protocol list I found that night, the one with 26 entries, I wasn't supposed to read past entry 20. I was supposed to stop at 20, go to shaft B, find the second clipboard at 12:03, and not read the remaining entries until March 19th. But I read them that night. All of them, including the ones that described what happens after April 2nd. I'm not going to tell you what they said. Not because they were frightening, although they were. Because every time I have learned what the log predicts, I have done it anyway. Every deviation I've attempted has been temporary. Every refusal has been reversed. Not by force, not by compulsion, by logic, by professionalism, by the simple, rational recognition that the next step is the correct one. It was already written. The log doesn't control me. It doesn't have to. It knows what I'll do. And that means I'm going back. And next time, I won't be early. I'll be right on time.